If this is your first week, a special welcome to you. My name's Nick, I'm the minister here, and I'll be leading us through our course together, but lots of other people are going to be taking part, including you. If you missed last week, a very, very brief recap, what we're doing. So each week we're exploring one of 9 different pathways, in which we can experience God, we can meet with God, we can encounter God, whatever words you'd like to use. Ways in which we can deepen our relationship with God. The course is based on the book by the same name by Gary Thomas. If you feel like you'd really like to go deeper and explore a lot more and read a lot more around the themes, then Mike, who is currently in the kitchen, but is kind of waving through the hatch, but come out and wave at people, Mike. Mike there is able to get hold of a few. It'll be a few weeks for them to get to you. So if you'd like one, have a word with Mike and he can order one to you and you can give him the money when you pick up the book.
Yeah, when the book arrives.
Brilliant, thank you. You don't need the book to, hopefully, to enjoy the course. Okay, let's just say that, but it's just if you feel like you really want to go deeper. Just a few things that I'll remind us of regularly as we go through the course. The first is that all of the 9 pathways have equal value. There's no hierarchy of spirituality, and all of us are created with a blend of spiritual preferences that form our spiritual personality. A blend of the 9 different pathways. You will find some of these easier than others. Some of them you will just throw yourself into and think, this is me. Others you will struggle on a particular evening and you think, didn't really do much for me. Expect that to be the case. That's okay, because we're all different. I truly believe that at least one of the evenings will really resonate with you. I would expect more than one. The other thing is that you may find by experiencing what we're doing that you gain new spiritual experiences. You gain a new string to your bow, if you like. Your spiritual repertoire expands. Just to say, if you do buy the Gary Thomas book, the content and the themes are all the same, but the headings for each week, which are each of his 9 chapters, are different here, because I've tried to use less churchy language than him. So if you think, I'm not sure, then they're in the same order, so you should be able to cross-reference. If you do miss a week, the sessions are being recorded. We're live on YouTube at the moment, but they're also available later on our YouTube channel, so you can always catch up if you miss a week. So, this week we are looking at meeting God through our senses. Now, as we start, I want to recognise that for some people, some of their senses are diminished. If that's you, when I'm talking about a particular sense, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be insensitive, but do recognise that God can communicate through the other senses. I think sometimes we overlook the fact that we are sensory beings. It just happens. Day by day, week by week, it just happens. We don't stop and think about it. So tonight we're going to. And it's perhaps only when one of our senses becomes temporarily or permanently disabled that we realise just how much we use it and just how much we depend on it. So just for a moment, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes tight so you can't see at all. You can stay seated, don't move, because otherwise it gets a bit dangerous. If you're on the YouTube as well, try it at home. I will tell you when you can open your eyes again, but just for the moment, just close your eyes so you can't see what's going on. And I'm going to tell you what's happening. So if you close your eyes now, I'm going to move on to the next slide, but don't open your eyes, and I'll tell you when. So keep your eyes closed. We have now moved on to the next slide. How does it feel? Just think to yourself how it feels that you can't see this next slide yet, unless you peek. Are you feeling frustrated? Are you wondering what's there? Do you feel like you're missing out? Now, we know that this moment is temporary. There will come a time very soon when I'll say, please open your eyes and you can see. Your sense will be restored. But just for a moment, remain in the darkness of having your eyes closed. And in doing so, recognize how special that sense is. Okay, you can open your eyes. Each of us finds, as I said, that our senses we just take for granted. But perhaps sight is the one that we depend on more than some of the others, or we think we do. But the reality is that all of our senses are equally helpful and important to us. That's why God gave them to us. Now, we have 5 physical senses. So, quick quiz. Shout out one of the senses.
Touch.
Touch.
Smell.
Smell. Hearing.
Sight.
Sight. Taste. We've got the 5. Well done. There we go. Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. But we have loads of other senses as well as human beings. Can you think of any other senses that we have?
Gut sense.
Gut sense,
Emotion.
emotions, sense of values, yeah? Balance, yeah? Sense of fun, or humour, a sense of hunger. We can sense empathy. We have a sense, sometimes we say, I have a sense of peace. Sense of direction we talk about. We've got lots of different senses. So although this evening we're going to focus on the 5 physical senses, just bear in mind that there are lots of other senses that we have. And it may be that God will encounter you through one of those. We particularly often experience that sense of peace. The Bible talks about, I'll come to you in a sec, peace that passes all human understanding. Or my personal translation, peace that makes no sense in the circumstances. You ought to be really upset, but somehow you've got that peace. All right.
Common sense.
Common sense. Well, of course. That was common sense, wasn't it? Thank you. In the Bible, we find time and time again that God is speaking to people through their senses. In fact, they have to use their senses to encounter God in some way. Sometimes people experience an audible voice speaking with them. Others saw remarkable things. On one occasion, when God wanted to get Moses' attention, he appeared to him in a bush in the desert. The bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. And this got Moses' attention. Bushes catching fire in the desert when they were dry and the big heat, not unusual, but the fact it wasn't burning up, that got his attention. He went to investigate, and God spoke to him audibly at that time. There are other occasions when God communicates with people from a cloud, or in fire, in visions and dreams, through senses of smell and taste. In the temple and the synagogue, the place of Jewish worship, incense and burnt offerings were a significant part of their worship experience. A lot of fragrance going on in there. In the Psalms, the Bible's songbook, there's a psalm that talks about tasting and seeing that the Lord is good. Others speak about feeling the ground shake in the presence of God. And there are times when it seems that people just couldn't put words to it, but they had a sense of God's presence with them, maybe gut feeling or instinct or something along those lines. Wherever you look in the Bible, if people are encountering God, their senses are involved. Each week, as well as looking generally at the Bible, we're looking particularly at the life and ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. And it won't surprise you for me to tell you that Jesus was a multi-sensory person. Well, he was a human being for a start, so of course he was. But we read about him speaking with people and listening to them. There are times when he seems to have acted on, spiritual intuition, not hearing necessarily an audible voice, but there's a time when he went into the desert just after he was baptized, and the Bible says he was propelled by the Spirit. Well, we don't know exactly what that was like, but I don't think it was a kind of get in there. It was just that sense of, I need to go into the desert. Jesus used the sense of touch in an incredible way. Some of you may remember Princess Diana. She is the mother of Prince William and Prince Harry, formerly when she was alive, married to Prince Charles. And when she was the Princess of Wales, she went into a hospital and met some AIDS patients, HIV positive. Now, in those days, there was an awful lot of fear and an awful lot of myth and legend and misinformation about HIV and AIDS. People were terrified of it. And Princess Diana did the unthinkable. She went and sat at the bed of an HIV positive patient, and she took his hand and she touched him. And the shockwaves that went through the country, I don't know if you remember that, it was palpable, it was headline news. That's the sort of thing Jesus was doing. When we read about him touching people who had a skin disease, often all classified under the heading of leprosy, but not necessarily just leprosy, touching people who were infectious, people that everyone else said, get out, stay on the edge of the village, don't come in. And Jesus touched them. It's the same sort of impact. When Jesus was trying to explain to his friends how he was, in effect, a spiritual staple diet, he said, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. And then he went on using figurative language to talk about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, which really confused his followers at the time. Later on, after the Last Supper, when he took bread and he took wine, and he spoke about them as being remembrances of his body and blood, which were going to be broken and shed when he died on the cross the next day, they began to associate it back with that. And we celebrate now in what different traditions call the Eucharist, Mass, Communion, sharing bread and wine, Lord's Supper. We still do that today because Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. Eat, drink, the sense of taste. And the sense of taste is quite an evocative one as the flavours come through our mouth. Jesus used the bread and the wine from a Passover meal, which was an ordinary sort of thing. There would have been bread and wine there. He didn't go and get it specially. But he gave them fresh significance by saying that these things would be used to remind us of the central moment in human history, as far as we're concerned, his death on the cross. So important that he engaged our senses in a really special way and engages them month by month, week by week, whenever we do this, in remembrance of him. There are a couple of occasions recorded in the biographies of Jesus, otherwise known as the Gospels, about him having a meal and it being interrupted very rudely. by a woman coming in and anointing him with oil. On one occasion, anointing him with a really expensive perfume. This was just before he was going to go into Jerusalem, where he knew he would be arrested and executed. And he said that she, the lady who did it on that occasion, had anointed him for his burial. Luke, who writes about this, tells us that the fragrance filled the whole room. You can bet every time people smelt that smell afterwards, it took them back to that room. They used to use fragrant spices when people died because of the way that people were buried. They weren't just put in the ground in a coffin, they were put in a cave and wrapped in bandages, and the spices were there just to mask the smell of decay. But that smell suddenly became associated with Jesus' death, which was for all of us. And actually, smell, probably of all of our senses, is able to evoke the most powerful memories. I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the reason is that our sense of smell is located very close in our brains to the place of memory. So it's an easy link. Let's have a look at some of the ways we can encounter God through our senses. And first of all, I just want to think about beauty, a sense of beauty. When we see something beautiful, it can stop us in our tracks. It may be a moment when, if we're looking for it, God speaks to us, and we were thinking a little bit of that last week. But something beautiful has the power to captivate us. This stained glass window is in the Chapel of the Blessed Sacrament of Buckfast Abbey. And in the chapel, it's probably 2 times, 3 times as big as that. It is enormous. It's one of the places I go to if I want to be captivated by God. I find it stunning. Something artistic that is beautiful can have an impact on us because it makes us perhaps feel humble. Well, I'm not like that. I couldn't do that. I'm not that gifted. That person is so talented and perhaps I'm not. Maybe God might use that to help us to appreciate the gifts and talents of another person. But we can move on from there, from I can't do that, to perhaps thinking, well, but I can do this. And maybe that will help us to have a sense of dignity about ourselves. What our gifts are, what our strengths are, an honest appraisal of ourselves. And then appreciating that that's how God made you. Beauty can change our perspective. When we stop and look at something beautiful, we may then see other things differently as a result. Artists put something of themselves into the artwork. And sometimes the way an artist might see something will be different from the way we have seen it before. But when we look into their art and we begin to catch something of what the artist has created, it perhaps helps to change our perspective. And beauty can actually embody truth in a way that words sometimes can't. Think of a beautiful piece of classical music. No words, just a beautiful piece of classical music, or an instrumental if you're not into classical music. Music can move us, can move our emotions, it can evoke thoughts, it can provoke our imagination. But no words are used. When I'm in the chapel with that in front of me and the sun streaming through, I couldn't articulate all that I'm experiencing, but I'm experiencing something of God's truth in that moment. We're going to look at the five primary senses, if you like, the five physical senses. I find it astonishing when I realise just how much of our brain power is taken up with the sense of sight, processing what comes into our eyes. When you think about what the brain has to do with the light that comes into our eyeballs through the lens that has focused it on the back of our eye, you realise just how complex that all is. It's got to discern shape, texture, movement, colour. And except when our eyes are closed, that is constant. It's no wonder it takes a third of our brain to process all that is coming in through our eyes. So if you have a sense of sight, how might that help you communicate with God? Well, look around, look up, look down, look in. Maybe you could be creative, not with a view to creating a masterpiece for everyone else to admire, but just something for you and God. Try this. Start with a blank piece of paper and some pens and just draw. It might be scary to start with because you might not be used to doing that sort of thing. You might be thinking, what am I going to draw? Just start moving the pen or the pencil on the paper. See what emerges. It may just be a doodle, it may be a scribble, but actually it might provoke you to think about something else when you look into it. A little bit later on, we're going to have the chance to be creative with some play, and Beverly is going to tell us all about that a bit later on. So when we are doing things like that, we are using our sense of sight. We're also probably using a sense of imagination and a whole load of other things too. Thinking of sight still, have you ever read a building? Architects don't just throw buildings together, you know. They think about these things, don't they? They put thought into the different features of where they're going to be within a building. And churches and cathedrals are no different. In fact, perhaps more so in some ways. If you think about Exeter Cathedral or Plymouth Cathedral, I've not been in Plymouth, so I can't talk about that. But any major Church of England or Catholic church, if you looked at it from above, it's cross-shaped. That's deliberate. When you go into them, particularly if you've ever been to somewhere like Canterbury Cathedral, you will probably just be blown away by the scale of this. Even just going to Buckfast Abbey does that for me, because you think it was just made by a few monks who hadn't previously been trained in stonemasonry. But these buildings are meant to be impressive because they're meant to speak to us of God's majesty, God's authority, God's significance. And in those sorts of church, the altar is the focal point at the head of the church, at the top of the cross, because it reminds us of Jesus' death that we've just been talking about, the bread and the wine, the central moment in human history. Even Baptist churches can be red, believe it or not. I don't mean colour red, I mean we can read what's going on. So this church building, actually this church building was built to be impressive. Particularly the outside was making a statement. It was saying, there's a church here. It's not, excuse me, we're a little church. There's a church. You need to notice this. But Baptist architecture, certainly in the Victorian era, was quite similar in many different ways. There may or may not be a balcony, but actually inside, usually there are two aisles, not one central one. Sometimes the reason they're different to a Church of England church, for example, is because they wanted to say, we're not Church of England. If you go into a Baptist church, certainly if it's still got its Victorian elements to it, you will see central to it is not an altar, but a pulpit. Because for Baptist churches and Baptist Christians, hearing what God's saying to us through the Bible, preaching sermons, is really important. The church where I served in Colchester had what I describe as the mother of all pulpits. It was, taller than that, because I tried to measure it once. 12 foot tall. When you stood in it, you could look people in the eye in the balcony. Now, bearing in mind it was built in the Victorian era, no microphones, no screens. They wanted the preacher to be visible, but man, you kind of got vertigo up there. But it was there like that for a reason. There's also an element in which Baptist churches inside don't have a lot of ornateness. We don't have a lot of gold fixtures and fittings. And part of the reason is that they want to say, well, we're not Anglican, but part of the reason is as well saying that there's something about simplicity. Jesus was a carpenter, not a goldsmith. Next time you go in, if you go into the church building just up above us, the sanctuary, have a look around. What might God be saying to you about who he is and who we are and how we are as we gather together because of the way things are laid out? Most of us depend on our sense of sight. If we're going to read or write, you may, of course, listen to audiobooks. But if you're going to do something creative, often it involves the sense of sight. In some churches, and we've got some, but they're not quite for the same purpose. If you go into some older churches, their stained glass windows depict scenes from the Bible. Old churches had them like that because in those days literacy was not very high, and this was a way of communicating the Bible stories to the people who couldn't read. It was early PowerPoint, if you like. Later on, they became ways of celebrating different things. So the windows upstairs in this church, some of them are dedicated in memory of people. They celebrate different aspects of their life, but also they do depict some of the aspects of who Jesus was. Other churches have pictures, painted pictures. We call them icons. Not the little things you click on your computer, but the original icons were pictures that were there for exactly the same reason. People were not literate, they couldn't read the words. The Bible was principally written in Latin in those days anyway, so most people had no chance. And so it was a way of enabling people to focus on some aspect of who God is, some aspect of Jesus, some aspect of Christ's life and work. Not to be worshipped in themselves, but to be pointers, to remind us, to provoke us. And like we did earlier on, there may be a moment when you're sat, when actually closing your eyes, cutting off that sense of sight and allowing your other senses to work instead, can be quite helpful because visual things might be distracting you at that moment. It seems that in the modern world, we are constantly bombarded by noise. I'm going to stop talking for a moment. It wasn't completely silent. I could hear rumbles of traffic. I could hear the projector humming. I could hear one or two people moving around. But the absence of noise can have the same effect for us as the absence of sight, removing the hustle and the bustle of sounds around us to help us to pause and listen for God, to help us focus our attention on him. Now, it's not always easy to find somewhere quiet. But when it happens, if it happens, perhaps you could ask God to speak gently into your soul at that moment. But similarly, music can. God can speak to us through a piece of music or a song. Sally and I went to a concert by a singer called Lauren Daigle a while back. She has a song called Love Like This. I'm going to play it a little later on. And the chorus hauntingly asks this question: what have I done to deserve love like this? And I just stood there. I didn't physically have tears streaming down my face, but they were inside. And then the response comes in a really powerful hallelujah. Praise the Lord. And I was deeply, deeply moved. And it was a moment when I guess there were quite a few hundred people in this concert, all jammed in. And it felt like I was the only one there, and I was having a moment with God. The reason we use songs and music in worship is because it's a powerful way of engaging our emotions and expressing our emotions. And you can if you really want to, but don't expect me to lead it. If you feel moved, you could dance to allow the music to move you physically. Maybe you're not someone who enjoys reading, but audiobooks can be really, really helpful. If you can get hold of an audiobook of the Bible being read by someone who's really good at reading, you could immerse yourself in that. So I believe there's a New Testament, or certainly the Gospel of Matthew, read by David Suchet, that you can get, which is, his voice is a good voice to listen to, but he really expresses it well. One of the less frequently used senses for encountering God seems to be touch. We can't physically touch God. So perhaps we think, well, he doesn't communicate with us through touch. Well, these are holding crosses. I don't know if you've ever used one, ever had one. You basically fit it into the palm of your hand and it fits really snugly. It is what it says, you hold the cross. And just allow it to sit in your hand and to feel it in your hand. Feel your fingers touching it, feel the wood, feel the shape. And allow God to communicate to you through it. I've got a couple of them, and just sometimes sitting, closing off as many of my other senses as possible, perhaps playing some music in the background to drown out outside noise. It feels quite intimate. Hugs. There's something really powerful about a hug. Now, of course, you need to be sure that somebody wants to be hugged. We need to make sure that that person is happy with it. Because an unwanted hug can make someone feel quite unsafe. But think about the last hug that you received that you wanted, where you felt at ease. How did that make you feel? What might that speak to you about how God feels about you? Or how you feel about God? Different textures, different temperatures, doing something that takes us out of our ordinary routine and focusing on that sense of touch can be really quite powerful. Last year, one of our 6 o'clock services, I asked everyone to hold an ice cube in their hand and let it melt. And it felt really quite uncomfortable, particularly when it was dribbling. And after a while, the cold actually started to hurt me a bit. And I asked people to think about those who've been excluded from church for different reasons, and how they might experience the church as cold-hearted, being made to feel uncomfortable or even pain of being excluded. God spoke to me through that exercise. I don't know about anybody else. You might be wondering about my sense of taste when you look at some of the things I wear. It does all go through the filter of Sally, most of the time anyway. But when I talk about a sense of taste, I'm not talking about fashion sense. We're talking about using the taste buds in our mouth.
Actually, actually, I just lost my mother, and I can't remember either.
That's you feel that loss, don't you, Chris, when you can't hug someone you love? Yeah. The sense of taste can be affected by environments. We know that taste was one of the senses that was adversely affected by COVID. But the Bible is full of tastes. Not just the bread and wine, but all sorts of different flavours are described and experienced. Sweetness may speak to you of one thing. Sourness may speak to you of another. Fruit might speak to you about how God wants to bear fruit in your life. Vegetables may help you think about the importance of balance in your life. Perhaps even, you may or may not do this, perhaps just giving thanks to God before you eat. Recognizing that you're about to experience test and asking him to speak through you as you eat. Smell. We're nearly there. Smell is a very powerful provoker of memories, as I said. If you walk past someone who wears the same aftershave as someone you used to know, you may well be reminded of that person. It transports you to the past. But smell can also remind us of God's presence, and incense is a very strong way of doing that, filling the room, filling our nostrils. But then there are unpleasant smells. How do they make you feel? The Bible talks about how the hypocrisy of religious people is like a bad smell in God's nostrils. I wonder what your favourite smells might be. What might they say to you about God?
I like flowers.
The smell of flowers is a good one, Chris.
Unless it's marigolds.
As with each pathway, though, there are some things just to be careful about. Senses are powerful. They can change our mood without us realising it. So just be aware of how we are feeling beforehand and how we're feeling during or after if we're spending some time focusing on trying to encounter God through one of our senses. If you're already feeling low, perhaps try not to engage with something that might lower your emotions further. Remember, as with all of the pathways, our senses are not the only way of experiencing God. Don't limit yourself just to your senses. Remember, there are other 8 pathways as well. And realise the limitations of our senses. They can speak to us of God, God can speak to us through them, but they're not the only way in which he reveals himself to us, and it's important that we check in with what we're experiencing to see if it's consistent with who God is. And if you're in doubt, check with a trusted friend. Each week, I've invited a couple of people to share with us some of their experience of using the different pathway. And tonight I'm really pleased that Fiona and Beverly are going to share with us, and they've also brought some activities for us to engage with afterwards. But just for a moment, we're going to listen to them sharing about their experience in using their senses and creativity and so on, and encountering God in that way, and then we'll come back to all the different activities. So Fiona first, please. Lovely, thank you.
Right, okay. It's really interesting to hear what Nick says, because I was thinking about the whole thing with senses and stuff, and I suffer from hypervigilance, so my senses are quite up there sometimes. And often my sense of smell is really strong. In fact, if you're anybody that's getting issues with drugs or alcohol, I can spot it a mile away, because my senses are, somebody can say to me they haven't, and I know, because my sense of smell is super duper as far as stuff like that goes. But I think when I was thinking about senses, I think sometimes our senses can really tune us into God, but they can also tune us into other stuff as well. They can tune us into sadness as well as joy. And one of the things I was thinking of tonight was a few months ago I went on a training course because as a counsellor I have to do so many CPD hours and stuff. And on this particular one I took part in a retreat. And if anybody knows me, I love art, and art not in the sense of who does it, but the whole process of it, and how you connect with God and connect with yourself through whatever you are making, and also looking at a piece of art and thinking, wow, that really speaks to me. And art can take so many different forms. Art can sometimes actually be really ugly and really painful, as well as really, really beautiful. But on this retreat course I was on, just before it, somebody that I'd been really involved with committed suicide, and it took me a long time to deal with it. So I was trying to think of ways how could I process, because as a counsellor you're taught to process your feelings, you're taught to be in touch with your senses and your emotions and other people's emotions. And at this place we looked at images of God and the different faces of God, and through art and other ways. And on the table there was paints and clay and stuff like that. And we put this music on from a guy called John Michael Talbot, which again, the music reminded me of years and years ago, many memories when I first heard this guy's music. And I went and sat at a table with a pile of clay. And I sat there for about 3 hours, not aware of the time or anything. And I didn't have to talk to anybody else or listen to anybody else. I just sat there making a sculpture. I made 2 or 3 things. And I poured all the feelings that I was feeling inside, all the sadness and the happiness of the person that had died. And I really connected with God through that. God really touched me in a way that I found hard to express my feelings. I'm not a touchy person just because of things in my past. But it's funny, the sense of touch, God has really taught me how to use that way on the people that people find difficult to love or go near. And so through creativity, I feel that God helps me to engage that way. And for healing for myself, I can do it through art and through clay. And also, it also teaches me how to touch other people. There are many people in this world, people that actually God has taught me that I feel safe with them and I can go and touch with them. So that's how God connects with me through senses, yeah.
Thanks, Pete. And Beverly.
I'm just going to mention that the Alice suggested you want to say what you want to say.
Mention the cards now.
On the table over there's a pile of cards. And those cards are cards of hope. And there's different images on them. And it's how God speaks to us again through our sight and through nature and through different things. And if you pick up the cards, there is a question on the back to challenge you on what you see in that image and what God is saying to you through your emotions. So it's worth just having a look at them.
Thank you, but they're not to take away.
No, I leave them back.
Hi. So I think Nick and Fiona have spoken really well about the creative process and senses. So I don't really want to talk very long. I am a local artist and teacher and mental health worker, and I try and encourage people to use creativity, and whether that's for their well-being, and I've used it for myself many years. From being a small child, it's always been very much a part of my life. I've been coming here for 20 years, and gradually I've developed my faith, and that's been alongside my creative process. And what I find is, and what I brought today, why brought it today. I can paint, I can draw, I can make in different ways, but there's something very special about clay, and I think it's because of the touch, it's because of the handling, and to me, it's from the earth, it's of the earth, and what it does for me, it gives me a kind of extra embodiment to the land and to the world, and to my faith as well. And tonight, I just want you to experience the clay, and don't think of it as having to make something, make a product, but just use your hands, use your fingertips. Think of what we have on our hands. We are made in Christ's image, and we have creativity pulsing through us because of that. And so, yeah, just be quiet and give yourself time and just maybe think about your faith, think about your connection to God, and just handle the clay, and whatever happens, and not to worry. So, you know, I'm not going to say, this is what you're going to make, and this is how you're going to make it. So, yeah, I just hope that maybe you can go away tonight. You can take the clay away. It's clay that does need to be fired, so maybe whatever you make, you need to be delicate with it, and maybe take a photo of it and then throw it away. But yes, just think about the experience, and maybe you'd like to write about it later, consider it. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much. So, we've got two activities you can get involved in. Create something with some clay, pick up a picture or two, probably just one because of how many of us there are, and you can take it back to where you're sitting and look at it, look at the question on the back, but please do return it. There's a number of other things that you might want to try. You could just close your eyes and use your other senses and just listen to the rest of your senses. Here, there are some pebbles, and you might like to pick up a couple of them. And there's some sharper ones and there's some softer ones, and just feel the different textures, feel the difference between them. And what might that say to you about what's going on in your life or in somebody else's life? What might that say to you about God? I very nearly went with a suggestion as to what it might say, but I'm really trying hard not to lead you, just to let you experience that. Here, there's a bowl of water. What I'm going to suggest is that you come, dip one hand in the water, keep the other one dry, feel the difference between the wet and the dry, maybe swirl around a little bit in the bowl, and then when you take your hand out, don't immediately dry it, just feel the wetness. Let it drip, not everywhere, but just let it sort of come, shake it off into the bowl, and just let it air dry for a minute, and feel how different temperature there is within the dry hand and the wet. And what might that say to you? There will be some music playing in the background. If you prefer just to sit and listen to the music, then please do. Focus on the music, the words. Here, there is some bread. It's gluten-free, so anyone can have some. Take a chunk. This isn't communion where you take a little bit. Take a decent-sized chunk. And before you put it in your mouth, hold it in your hand and look at it. And then maybe smell it. Feel the texture of it. Maybe feel or sense the saliva beginning to water in your mouth as you're looking forward to putting it in. And then feel the taste of it. What might that say to you about God and about you? Here we have some sweet and sour. So there's some lemon. Just take a little bit of lemon, and if you dare, just put it on your tongue and let it sit there for as long as you can, and just feel the sourness. And then grab a couple of grapes and chew them to get rid of the sour taste, but also the difference. What's that difference say to you? On this table here, there is a little bit of, it's actually anointing oil, technically speaking. It's oil made with frankincense and myrrh. All you need to do is just dip the top of a finger in it. It's very, very pungent. Okay? You might want to take a tissue, you might just want to dip the corner of a tissue in instead. Don't soak it, because we need it to be enough for other people. You only need a tiny bit, but then a sniff, not really hard, because it might make you sneeze, but just allow the fragrance to fill your nostrils. What might that say to you about who God is and who you are? I think this might be a popular one. I've got some chocolate on this table. There are two plates. One has just got good old dairy milk. The other has got dairy milk with stuff in it. I've left the wrappers there just in case you need the allergy information and so on. But just let a little bit of chocolate rest on your tongue and melt and savour it. And if you dare, you could try the one that's got popping candy in it. How does that feel? What does that do? The contrast between what's going on. And then the reason they're kind of working their way around here is over here, I've got my holding crosses. If you want to, you can take one of the holding crosses and just kind of sit roughly like that in your hand, however you want. Can I ask, before you do, just use a little bit of hand gel and make sure your hands are dry so we don't slather these in gel, but just for hygiene. If you would like, after experiencing one of those, or even if you don't get to experience one and you'd like one, you can get them from the Christian Resources Project. Mike can happily sell you a holding cross. I think Fee is getting some in at Greenspace as well. We can get hold of what you can get hold of one literally tonight and buy one for yourself later on if you wish. We're going to spend about half an hour or so with these different activities. If you're still with us online, well done for persevering. The worksheets for this week have been sent out by email. They're also available on our website. So if you're online, obviously you can't participate in the activities we've got, but you might like to have a go at filling in the worksheet, read it through and think about where you might try some of those activities during the week. So whatever you feel like you'd like to have a go at, please do. And we'll come back together at about 12:30. Oh, sorry, one other thing. If you didn't pick up any bee-friendly seeds last week, I've got loads of them. I need to get rid of them. Otherwise, our house is going to be inundated with bee-friendly flowers and we'll be swarmed with bees. So please take a handful of them and scatter them somewhere to plant some seeds for bees. This was from last week, if you weren't here. off. Please keep going until we throw you out. But thank you so much for coming. We will meet, if you'd like to, same time next week, same place, and we'll explore another sensory pathway. If you'd like to take some bits home with you to have a go when you get home, then other than Fee's cards, anything else you could take with you. Oh, and my holding crosses. Anything else you could take with you. But thank you so much for coming. May God bless you this week in all that you are doing. Bye-bye.
Yes, it will be interesting.